Winnie Madikizela-Mandela married a man who would become the world's most famous political prisoner. She herself would become the mother of the nation, a title tarnished just months before Nelson Mandela was freed in 1990. Born in 1936 as a black woman in a country shackled by racial discrimination and poverty, she was further disadvantaged by being born into a rural African village, Mbongweni, Bizana, in the Eastern Cape area of South Africa, once known as Pondoland. The fourth of 8 children, Winnie's father worked for the government, and her mother was a teacher, but died when she was only 8 years old. Winnie lived up to her Nkosa name, Nomzamo, she who tries. In 1953, she entered the Jan Hofmeyr School of Social Work in Johannesburg, despite government efforts to restrict black education. Apartheid, meaning apartness, became an official legal policy of racial segregation after the National Party came to power in 1948. Winnie completed her social work degree and turned down a scholarship to the United States to become the first qualified black medical social worker at Baragwanath Hospital in the black township of Soweto, outside Johannesburg. She was exposed to the appalling social conditions of black people in the worker dormitories called townships that surrounded the white cities.
In our sick society, I dealt mostly with children. I dealt with hunger, with poverty directly. I was involved with my community at grassroots level, and it was one of the most painful things for me to be in touch with the reality of our country's problems, the rife unemployment, the poverty of the people, and the fact that there was no way of changing those conditions other than changing the whole status quo.
Politicized by her work, Winnie got involved in the African National Congress, or ANC, a progressive organization struggling to improve black living conditions and fighting for their basic human rights. In the early 1950s, the ANC ran a civil disobedience campaign in which people burned the hated passbooks. Shortly afterwards, Nelson Mandela was arrested with 155 others and charged with high treason. The trial took 5 years.
Everybody was talking about this man. I was at work at Baragwanath Hospital, and I got a call from a man who introduced himself over the phone as Nelson Mandela. He said he wanted to see me and discuss certain issues with me. I was petrified. We met, and it transpired he wanted me to help raise funds for the then treason trial. That is how I met my husband.
After a whirlwind romance, they were married in a Methodist service in the Transkei area.
There is what we call in Xhosa Uyana, where elders come and give you the last wise words as a young bride. My father said to me, I must remember that I am marrying the struggle and not the man.
Winnie settled in Mandela's home in Soweto at 8115 Orlando West. Nelson continued his political work, and they spent very little time together.
I saw there was demonstrations and people were arrested and filled the jails. And Winnie was one of those people that were arrested. She was expectant with her first child at that time, and even in that state she went to jail.
The prison was crowded. There were no special facilities for political prisoners. We were all just thrown together. The life I've led from that moment, always been in and out of prisons. I can no longer even remember how many times I've been arrested and how many times I've been actually jailed. A black woman has had to battle all the way to fight against the oppression of her as a human being, to fight against the dominance culturally in a traditional society where the black woman's position is in fact at home. My husband was never there when both children were born. He was either in prison or out gathering information about their treason trial.
During the 5 long years of the treason trial, Winnie brought up their 2 children, Zenani, born in 1959, and Zinzi, born in 1960, and kept the home fires burning. During this time, the government opened fire on about 6,000 unarmed demonstrators in Sharpeville, killing 69 people and causing outrage around the world.
The day the trial came to an end, the leaders of the African National Congress came home. They came to celebrate the results of the trial and the fact that they had been acquitted. My husband did not even enter the house. They were all jubilant and they were standing outside. I still remember very vividly, Joe Modise walked into the house and asked me to pack a few items for my husband. All I was told was that I'll be seeing him in a few days' time. That was the last time I saw my husband at home.
Nelson Mandela became known as the Black Pimpernel.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
In December 1961, he was arrested on his way back from a secret meeting. At his trial for sabotage, Nelson Mandela made an iconic speech that reverberated around the world. Mandela was found guilty of sabotage and sentenced to life imprisonment on the dreaded prison on Robben Island. But Winnie would not hold him in her arms for another 10 years.
Part of my soul did go with him. My husband has been fighting for the liberation of the African people, for the working harmoniously of all the racial groups in this country. I shall never lose hope, and my people shall never lose hope. In fact, we expect that the work will go on.
He would remain in prison for 27 years and become an icon of the struggle for human rights and the abolition of apartheid. As the wife of a dangerous political prisoner, the apartheid regime subjected Winnie to a series of harsh legal orders and harassment. First, she was banned under the Suppression of Communism Act and placed under virtual house arrest at her Orlando, Soweto house. The feared security police watched her constantly. She was not allowed to receive visitors, be quoted, or socialize. But Winnie challenged every order, worked clandestinely for the ANC, participated in underground meetings and the printing of pamphlets. She was often charged with breaking her banning order.
We were very young then, and my mother tried getting us into schools in Soweto. And the black principals then were very scared of police harassment. They were afraid to take us until such time that some friends of my mother's heard about our plight, and then they offered to have us educated in Swaziland. The security branch always arrested me the day my children were on the way back home. I was never there as a mother to shape them. I was never there as a mother to hold my little girls' hands, take them to school and introduce them to their teachers, as is the glory of every mother. My banning order prevents me from entering educational premises.
In 1969, she was detained without trial in solitary confinement for 16 months under the Notorious Terrorism Act.
When they detained me, I had just been to a heart specialist. I have a heart condition, and the security branch knew that. The cell in which I was held at the beginning was so small that if I stretched my hands, I touched both walls. I could barely exercise. Being held in Communicado is one of the cruelest things any human being can do to another. I was interrupted right through, day and night, for 7 days and 7 nights. As they changed the teams, Sonnypool would rub his hands and say he is waiting for that moment when they shall break me completely. By the time they interrogated me, they knew everything. On the 7th day, I started urinating blood. I don't remember how I was brought back to the cell. I found myself just there. To this day, the memory of that bunch of keys, the clicking, the noise they would deliberately make, felt they were hitting the inner core of your soul. They never switched off the light. I lost track of time. It becomes so difficult to keep sane with absolutely no, that I would actually hunt for ants. If I had an ant in the cell or a fly, then I would regard myself as having company for the day.
She was released in October 1969 after 491 days in solitary confinement without being charged. She was banned for 5 years and placed under house arrest. In 1971, a gunman was seen prowling the yard of her Soweto home. The following year, 2 men tried to strangle her in her bed, but her screams attracted neighbors and the men fled. In 1973, unknown people, suspected to be security police agents, smashed her windows and doors and cut her telephone line.
But what I went through, that personal experience, hardened me so much. The security branch had made me the soldier at heart I am today. There was no way that you could talk any language of peace to vicious men who treated defenseless women and children in that manner. I knew then that somehow there had to be a political crisis in this country for us to reach the ultimate goal.
They were peacefully protesting enforced learning in the language of the white oppressors, Afrikaans. Police opened fire and a young boy was shot dead. The township exploded in anger, and hundreds died as the police brutally put down the revolt, which later spread to other parts of the country.
We saw 1976, the tragedy of our country. Any mother who saw that would not wish to see that again. The bloodbath we went through, collecting our children's bodies from the streets because they dared oppose the Afrikaner.
The government blamed Winnie for the June 1976 youth uprising and banished her to a small farming town called Brandfort, more than 300 kilometers away. They came in the middle of the night, a typical security police terror tactic.
It happened ever so suddenly at about 3 one morning. They cocked the door down. They took my mother off to a police station. Then after a few hours, a big truck arrived and they just started loading things. Then they took me and the big truck to the police station, and my mother was told then that she would be moved to Brandfort and was just taken there. It was quite shocking, you know.
The house in Brandfort had a bare earthen floor, and she only had a small coal stove as winter approached. Her fridge was housed at the police station because there was no electricity. She had to fetch water down the street in a bucket and heat it herself. She could not speak the local languages. The police watched her day and night.
The government's own version of a prison without walls, a prison outside prison.
Mandela kana bua na fisha.
Ono ke kwa ke na khagagage. Ono tswa. Ono o tshwara.
I engaged myself heavily in numerous projects for the community. In a way, it became a livable prison, which was a point of departure for me to serve my people where I had been placed without any choice.
Winnie, ona re hali dijo. Ebile a ha bana dilamunu ko skweleng. Le phofo a re sena. A ntsha di parcel. Le re phaka. A re ha dijo di sopo. Ebile a ba a etsa. A ba a dira. Man ke bua le phaka Winnie. A ba dira ntho ya bone le bo brother ya gore every month go phakiwe diphofo mo di.
Yeah. Crash yo. Ya ke a le udimo ya ntse tswela pele ha bohloko.
Ono ke kwa ke na khagagage.
Ono tswa.
Ono o tshwara.
Winnie challenged racist attitudes in town, shopped in white shops, and disregarded her restrictions. She began a clinic, a soup kitchen, and initiated vegetable garden projects.
Winnie is really very amazing. There she's banished to Brandfort, God-forsaken place, and she revolutionizes the whole place. And of course, the other people, seeing the way she's fighting the system and the oppression, they start taking it from her, you know, it becomes infectious.
She looked so brave, but really, she was traumatized. By 1985, unrest was spreading throughout the country, and the government declared a state of emergency. There were running battles in the townships of Brandfort. Amid the harassment, arrests and detentions, Winnie had to apply to the minister for permission every single time to visit her husband on Robben Island. In the beginning, she could only visit every 2 years, but later more visits were allowed. After his daughter Zenani married a Swazi prince, she was allowed to visit him in jail. It was the first time in 14 years that Nelson had physical contact with a member of his family.
Throughout the years, visits to him have been a tremendous source of inspiration. The most painful experiences is to give the prison your back and return back home, knowing fully well that you are leaving him there for life, as far as those who have jailed him think.
While she was away, the security police raided her house and later firebombed it and burned it down. They blamed activists, but it was clear who was really responsible.
The struggle goes on. There has never been any doubt about that.
While Winnie waited for the government to fix her house prison, she defiantly moved back to Soweto. It seemed the government had changed their strategy for her.
When she came back into the community, she generated an enormous amount of energy, and there was enormous popularity around the iconic figure that she had developed into. Those youth coalesced around Mrs. Mandela and became known as the Mandela United Football Club. Didn't really play much football, but were engaged largely as a bodyguard.
As the struggle against apartheid intensified, the stakes became higher. Winnie began to address rallies, her language increasingly militant.
Bring you messages of love from our leaders inside prisons. Pretoria has failed to rule our country. Bua Mandela! Bua! Bua! We are here today to tell you that that day is not far when we shall lead you to freedom. Amandla!
Shortly afterwards, on 13th April 1986, she made another speech in Munseyville Township, where she advocated the practice of necklace, which used petrol and car tires to burn people alive. She told the crowd, "With our boxes of matches and our necklaces, we shall liberate this country." But the undisciplined violence emerging from the Mandela United Football Club was drawing unwelcome attention.
Where we have this period which we call the sort of 4 months of madness between November 1988 and February 1989, where a number of people were killed by football club members, including the famous Stompie Sepe case. And it was these cases that formed the focus of the TRC investigation. So we saw an intensification of struggle and resistance, but also at the same time a massive intensification of repression. And in that context begin to become a law unto themselves, imposing discipline and punishment, which included torture, kidnappings and murder. Of course, this created enormous tension with community bodies.
Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 25 years and an icon of the international community, had to be freed and a peaceful settlement negotiated. On the 10th of February 1990, President F.W. de Klerk announced that Nelson Mandela would be freed unconditionally and the ANC and other political movements would be unbanned. The next day, with Winnie at his side, Nelson Mandela walked free and led the country to political liberation. On 27th of April 1994, the ANC won the first non-racial general election. And on 10th of May 1994, Nelson Mandela became the first black president.
Why would I order the burning of
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was tasked with opening up the festering wounds of apartheid. Part of this involved the actions of the Mandela United Football Club in the late 1980s.
The experience was quite surreal. Ms. Madikizela-Mandela always has this remarkable public image of being impeccably dressed, hiding behind dark shades. At one level that's understandable because these were not light allegations. They related to torture and murder and abduction and so forth. You didn't get a sense that you were talking to a human being, a person per se, that she had a wall around her which was impossible to penetrate. This was not something that she had developed because of the Truth Commission, but perhaps over her many, many years of experience of surviving in a hostile environment. I think it's very difficult for people on the outside to fully appreciate the kind of experience that Mrs. Madikizela-Mandela went through during her own journey from the early 1960s. So there's a litany of awful experiences that would have driven anyone to the edge. And it's very difficult in the South African context, or indeed in any conflict context, to draw neat lines all the time between victims and perpetrators, and there is an area where they cross over, where victimization can generate perpetration. And Mrs. Madikizela-Mandela almost represents the archetypal victim perpetrator.
On the last day of the hearing, the TRC chairperson, Nobel Peace Prize winner Archbishop Desmond Tutu, appealed to her to apologize.
I acknowledge Mrs. Madikizela-Mandela's role in the history of our struggle, and yet one has to say that something went wrong, horribly, badly wrong. Many love you. People out there who want to embrace you. I still embrace you because I love you. And I love you very deeply. I beg you, please, you are a great person. And you don't know how your greatness would be enhanced if you were to say, sorry, things went wrong, forgive me.
I will take this opportunity to say it is true. Things went horribly wrong. I fully agree with that. And for that part, I am deeply sorry.
I would defy anyone to go through that experience and retain some kind of balanced, normal reaction. The fact that Mrs. Madikizela-Mandela didn't end up in some kind of institution is perhaps a remarkable reflection of her own strengths. But this is also an extremely damaged human being.
On 24th of April 2003, 7 years after her apology to the TRC, Winnie was found guilty on 43 counts of fraud and 25 of theft. Despite her growing list of criminal convictions, she remains very popular within the ANC and has continued to voice the grievances of the marginalized, poor, and downtrodden. In 2013, she published her memoirs of her 491 days in detention. Winnie continues to seize the imagination of the nation, either revered as the mother of the nation or as a criminal guilty of crimes against children and the struggle. Neither view is entirely correct, and the complexities of this iconic and damaged public person continue to elude both South Africans and the world.